Hey everyone, it's Nathan, and today I wanted to show you guys how I mix kick and bass. So we've got an EDM track here, and I've got a nice smooth sub bass running underneath the whole thing. So let's go ahead and have a listen to it, and then we'll get started. Okay, so that's what we've got, and we're just going to jump right in, and we're going to pull up an EQ for the kick, and we're going to pull up an EQ for our sub. So as you can tell right away, we've got our kick here on the right, and we have our sub on the left. And first things first, because in this track I've got sub bass. Whenever you have a sub, it typically means, in the majority of cases, like 90% of cases, you're going to be cutting your kick relatively high, somewhere in the 80 to 100 hertz range. Right here, I've cut it at about 102.5 hertz with an 18 dB per octave filter. Now, with the sub, I've just gone ahead and high-passed the sub at about 30, just because when you get to the point where you're mastering your track, there's just a lot of wasted headroom down there that you don't need. Depending on the genre that you're working in, sometimes you set that a little bit lower, like say 20 to 25 hertz. Anyway, moving on to the kick, I'm just going to go ahead and play everything. I want you guys to hear how this kind of high pass here affects the whole balance of the track, and really how the low end kind of just becomes all mushy when I remove it. So we're going to play and disable that as everything's playing. So you can really hear how that it makes everything sloppy. Just not enjoyable to listen to that at all. So, moving on, around here at about 800 hertz, I just dipped a little bit. Now, this is a subjective thing. You don't need to do what I'm doing. You just need to do what will give you the sound that you want. So, if we listen to everything playing and we enable and disable this filter right here, you'll probably notice how it just kind of brings the kick more forward in a way that, in this particular mix, I wanted the kick to be in the back, just kind of supporting everything. Everything else is more forward, the kick is further in the back. So let's play along and we can kind of hear what's going on there. So it's pretty subtle. Hopefully you can hear how just subtracting a little bit in this 800 hertz mid-range really kind of pushes the kick a little further back. And then at 2K, I added some presence back in, because this is actually where I want you to kind of hear when the kick is coming in that there is a click on it. So we'll play with that, and we'll kind of listen to how it affects everything. So you can hear how it just kind of brings some of that presence back in. And yeah, I got really playful with this kick. But basically what I'm doing right here with these last two, with this low pass filter and this little dip here at 4K, is I'm just getting rid of some of that top end presence. Like I said, I wanted the kick in the back because it sounds awesome, and that's just the kind of choices I make, which are generally pretty awesome. So what we're going to do is we're just going to play everything, and we'll actually disable and enable these as everything's playing, and you'll hear how it kind of changes the forwardness of the kick. So all those are doing is they're just pushing that kick a little further back in the mix so that it gives it that kind of warmth that I was after while making this track. Now moving over to the sub, I did a little dip here at about 100 hertz. This is just something that, for whatever reason, I do really often. Whenever I have just like a pure sub and I have a kick that I've high-passed fairly high to go with it, at the cutoff point for the kick, I tend to put a little dip in the sub. I don't think it's necessary, especially if you're sidechaining, but for me, I just like the sound of it, and it kind of cleans things up a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're just going to play everything, and we'll listen to how that this affects the kind of balance of the sub. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to solo the kick and the sub together so that you can really focus in on how that's affecting the kind of clarity of the low end. So, like I said, with sidechaining, which we're going to get to in a moment, with sidechaining, it's not necessary to do this, but it's just a preference that I have, and maybe you guys can try it yourself and see how much more amazing it makes your track. Anyway, so let's move on to pretty much the most important part of how I got this kick and bass to mix together is something you're probably familiar with or that you've heard of, which is sidechaining. So we're going to look at our sub, and this might be a little confusing because I'm using this really awesome plugin by FabFilter. It's their gate plugin, which you can actually use as a sidechaining tool. And you're going to be looking over here as everything's playing, and you'll get a feel for the kind of gain reduction that we have going on here. Now, I actually have two sidechains on the sub that we're looking at here, and that's because I've not just sidechained the sub to the kick, but I've also sidechained it to this kind of perk effect, this percussion effect that I've got going on here, which I'm just going to solo so that you know what it is that you're listening for. So it's that kind of, it's like an airy kind of subby effect. I don't know, I got super creative, and that came out, so we'll see how it works. Anyway, so starting with the kick, I actually can't remember which one of these was being sidechained to the kick, but what you're going to notice is we're just going to play everything together right now, just the kick, the sub, and the other sub perk, as I labeled it. And you'll see how the sub, the volume of it, drops down when either the kick or this sub perk is playing. And you'll actually be able to see it on the diagrams here, where the darker gray represents gain reduction, and the lighter gray is just the standard level. So as you can tell, the sidechain on the left, that's our kick sidechain, and the one on the right is our sub perk sidechain. And so what we're going to do is we're actually just going to disable these gates. We're going to bypass them on the sub track, and you'll just hear how everything starts to kind of swamp. And then we'll start by, as everything's playing, we will enable the kick sidechain, and then we'll also enable the sub perk sidechain as well. And you'll just hear how everything cleans up. So it just cleans everything up. Sounds sounds amazing, honestly. I love this. So we're gonna play everything together, and you'll kind of get a feel for how everything's going. I'm gonna do the same thing with these side chains. I will bypass them and then re-enable them so that you can hear how it's kind of affecting the whole balance of the track, just making it sound nice and smooth. So let's go ahead and play everything again, and we'll have a listen. So it just sounds way better. And, you know, I just want to show you guys the effects of doing some pretty nice side chaining. Before I get away from this, I actually want to show you the amount of gain reduction that's happening between the kick and the sub, and then the sub perk and so forth. Because, you know, you can use any amount of gain reduction. There isn't a set rule. It's just what sounds best to your ear. So we're going to solve the kick and the sub, and we'll listen to, and you'll notice up here, you got your gain reduction graph on the right, and it'll tell you how much amplitude or volume is being subtracted from the sub when the kick hits. So as you can tell, it's about 30 dB of gain reduction, which is fairly substantial. I can't say that I always do that much sidechaining, but I'm definitely doing it for an effect in this track. And then with the sub perk, I'm definitely going to be doing a lot of gain reduction there as well, because the sub perk is meant to be the sub for the moment that it comes up. It actually replaces the volume and the subbiness of the sub, which kind of gives you a nice little change in texture. So let's listen to that as well. So with that sub perk, we're getting just pretty much full gain reduction, probably over 60 dB of, yeah, it looks here, it's about 100 dB of gain reduction. And, you know, I'm just showing you guys how the sidechain cleans things up. You know, I'm not going to go into full detail how you do sidechaining because there's a lot of tutorials out there. I might do one in the future, but let's just move on and see what else we can learn here. As a matter of fact, there is one little trick I wanted to show you guys. This is honestly, it's a great little trick to have up your sleeve. Whenever you're mixing your whole track and you want to focus on how the low end sounds while everything's playing, because it's the best way to check everything. What I like to do is I have an EQ on my master, and the EQ is just a low-pass filter at 100 hertz. And I can set it up so that I can bypass it and enable it and hear what's going on my low end while everything else is playing. So you can kind of hear what's going on down there with better focus. It's basically like a microscope that lets you hone in on that specific frequency range. So what we're going to do is we're just going to play everything and we'll enable this, and you'll hear how you can hear the low end better. And as a matter of fact, since we're still talking about sidechaining, since it's so amazing, I'm going to pull the sidechains on the sub up, and we're actually going to go ahead and bypass and enable those as everything is playing. And you'll hear, as we're focusing on the low end, how it changes, and you'll really get to hear it by itself, which is really cool. So let's play everything and see if this works. So that's everything in terms of sidechaining and EQ. The last thing that I want to touch on is you may have noticed earlier when I was looking at the kick that I had some limiting on it. Or in this case, I have 2 limiters in series. Now, I wasn't sure if I wanted to show you guys this just because, well, I mean, they're not really doing too much in terms of noticeable effects. And in fact, when I did it, I might have just been super hyper focused or something and thought, wow, this is going to change my track. It's going to make it better. But, anyway, I'm just going to show you guys and, we'll figure it out there. So I have 2 limiters in series. I have the T-Rack soft clipper, which is just like, all it does is if my kick gets too loud at some point, and I'm actually going to bring up a great little diagram for getting a feel for that, is I like to use FabFilter Pro L because it's got this wonderful amplitude graph that shows you what's going on in terms of your volume. Now, this first clipper is just, like I said, shaving off the top of that kick. In fact, I'm pretty sure I use it more just to change the sound of the kick rather than the actual amplitude, and that changes from time to time. So let's go ahead and listen to that kick by itself, and we'll hear what's going on here. So we're going to disable PSP Vintage Warmer first, and then we'll just listen to the classic clipper, and we'll A/B it back and forth. And you can notice over here how the volume difference between when it's on and when it's off is pretty substantial. Looks like it was about 40 dB. And really what it's doing is it's just shaving off the part of the kick we don't need, and it's also getting rid of a little bit of the clickiness, because when a limiter is as fast as this soft clipper is, it cuts the attack portion of your kick. That transient part, it gets caught in the limiter. So you don't even hear it. The limiter just shaves it off, says, nope, don't want to hear you, later. And so that's pretty much what's going on here. And so you can hear it's just taming that peak. And we'll move on to Vintage Warmer. Now, I love Vintage Warmer. I use it on way too many kicks. Honestly, it's like my kick maker almost, except I have a different tool for that, which is awesome. Anyway, so with Vintage Warmer, I can't remember what I did with it, but we'll just listen to it and then I'll tell you. Okay, so I did something pretty unconventional with the Vintage Warmer here. Typically I use it to just maximize the volume of my kick. In this particular case, I just took vintage warmer and I made the low end of the kick louder while keeping the high end pretty much the same. So I took the threshold, or the drive in this case, on PSP vintage warmer. The drive is essentially your threshold. The drive turns up the volume, the input volume of the tool, which drives the input volume into the fixed threshold of vintage warmer. So then you get gain reduction, which you can see and turn up here. And I've just used vintage warmer's unique sound to basically take what I had in terms of energy in the kick and just make it louder. So you'll notice how just as everything's playing and I A/B vintage warmer while everything else in the track is playing, you'll notice how it just warms up that low end, kind of gives it more character. So let's go ahead and listen now. So I can't say that it's doing that noticeable of an effect, but it is doing something. It's like I was talking about when we first started. It's pushing that kick a little bit further back in the mix. And that's, that's just the tool I use to do that. And that's pretty much how I got the kick and the bass to work in this track. And, I hope that was helpful. If you guys like this video, please like and subscribe below. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. It could certainly influence what I do for my next tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and look forward to releasing my next video so that you guys can learn from that as well. And I'll talk to you guys later. See ya.